everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. We're going to be jumping back into the series on Nick Land and his thought. Today, we're going to be looking at a subject that is not new to Nick Land. He's not actually the originator of the idea, but he does have a very nice summary of kind of the concepts and his thoughts on it here. We're going to be talking about IQ shredders. We're going to be talking about the phenomenon of cities, what they end up doing to civilizations, how civilizations that concentrate their talent inside cities change the way that they function, and why kind of this current modern iteration of this phenomenon might lead to some very interesting and different results that society is going to have to overcome in the long run. But before we do all that, guys, let's go ahead and hear from today's sponsor. So obviously you want to take control of the frame, you want to take control of the debate, but you also want to take control of your health, which is why today I need to discuss a pressing issue with you, which is the FDA's attempt to control a powerful health supplement called NMN. This controversy surrounding NMN highlights how certain forces seek to manipulate the market and limit consumer access to beneficial products. And with the sale of NMN possibly coming to an abrupt halt at any time, it's crucial to act quickly. The reality is that centralized control over health products can lead to a lack of choice and innovation for consumers. The FDA's action to potentially reclassify NMN as a drug instead of a supplement only serves the interests of big pharmaceutical companies while leaving consumers out in the cold. The FDA is attempting to change the status of NMN supplements to be classified as a drug, which would allow pharmaceutical companies to control it. The move isn't based on the efficacy or safety of NMN, but is aimed at cornering the market and taking the supplement away from you, the consumer. And with the sale of NMN potentially stopping at any moment, now is the time to secure your supply. NMN, or nicotinamide mononucleotide, is a precursor to NAD+, which has been shown to provide numerous health benefits such as improving energy, weight management, endurance, strength, and even anti-aging. By potentially reclassifying NMN as a drug, the FDA is restricting access to a supplement that could significantly improve people's lives. Despite the controversy, you still have an opportunity to take advantage of Black Forest's NMN supplement. I just got this in, guys, and I'm looking forward to the boost in energy levels, mental clarity, and overall well-being. Everybody says once you start taking this supplement, you'll wonder how you ever manage without it. With the sale of NMN potentially coming to an end due to the FDA's actions, now is the time to act. Black Forest NMN is available for purchase, and you can even get a 10% discount using the code Auron at blackforestsupplements.com/Auron. So stand up for your right to access beneficial health products and fight back against those who seek to limit your choices. Make sure to check out the link in the description below and use that promo code I just mentioned to get your discount. All right, guys, so let's go ahead and get started looking at Nick Land's work here with the IQ shredder. Now, like I said, this concept is not original to him. It's actually original to another very important kind of writer and blogger for neo-reactionary thought who goes by the pen name of Spandrel. He was one of the original people who kind of came up with this idea. And it's so often the case when we look at some of Nick Land's work, he's often already in the process of a conversation. He's often like, when we look at the Dark Enlightenment, he's really already read Yarvin. He's reacting to Yarvin. He's talking about his ideas and exploring them in more detail, kind of applying his own thought, his own kind of trained philosophy to the thoughts of Yarvin. The same thing is true here. This is a part of his Xenosystems series, but it is really a fragment that is in the context of kind of an ongoing discussion on a topic. So I'll be filling some of that back in. Now, before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about cities, right? We need to talk about cities, and we need to talk about concentrations of population, because that's going to be really key when we jump into the text itself. So something we may not think a whole lot about, but it is true, and you can look at it's not just somebody like Nick Land or Spandrel. You don't have to go to kind of out there neo-reactionary authors to kind of look at this concept. You can read somebody like Christopher Lasch and The Revolt of the Elites, or you could look at somebody like Charles Murray in Coming Apart. And they talk about this phenomenon of kind of gleaning the social capital away from the hinterlands and gathering it into centers of population. So, for instance, what what does everybody need to do right now to kind of raise their social level, climb the social ladder, and improve their chances of getting a better job? Well, you could start a company, a plumber. You could become a plumber. There are a couple different routes. It doesn't always have to be the same thing, but for the most part, if you want to elevate your socioeconomic status, you need to go to college, right? And to go to college, you usually need to go to a population center. You do have an increasing number of colleges everywhere now, because it's so ubiquitous, because everybody has to go to it. But most little towns don't have one, and even the larger towns that have an okay one, they're not very prestigious. If you want to get a really good job, if you want to make big connections, which is probably the more important part of college, then you need to go ahead and go to these bigger schools that are in these population centers. Well, how do you get into these? Well, you have to take what is more or less an IQ test, right? You have to take SATs, you have to take ACTs, you have to take these tests that go ahead and skim kind of the top cognitive population from any given area. So what's happening? Well, a lot of the people, if you had a more regional society, many people from kind of the lower or middle classes who kind of broke through and had a better IQ would have grown up in those areas. They would have stayed in those towns, and they might have been leaders in those towns. They might have had, they might have started nice, good businesses. Or there might have been elected mayor, or they might have, done something to better their community. They would have been high functioning members inside their class, inside their community, right? But what happens now? Well, staying in town is in many ways kind of a death sentence. I mean, how if you've been in the kind of the college sphere, you know the word townie, right? What's townie mean? Oh, that means somebody who is from the town in which the university is, but is not part of the university. And they're usually looked down on because they were not selected by this kind of class selection machine, this IQ selection machine, and drawn in. They're just kind of the local stock, right? So maybe they don't belong here in the sense that even though it's their town, right? That it's even though it's literally the place they live, they don't belong in your sphere of kind of highly selected people. And so what happens with these colleges? Well, they suck talent out of all these different areas and they concentrate it in these usually more urban areas, these more populated areas. So now these people who would have been leaders in their hometown, they would have been businessmen, they would have been politicians, they would have been valuable members of the church, they would have solved community problems, they could have elevated kind of the level of their class, the level of their town. They're not there anymore, right? They've been skimmed out of that. They've been selected out by these kind of IQ selection machines that combs through our society and pulls out all the most promising people. And it picks those people up and it places them into these cities, right? Now, Charles Murray, in his book Coming Apart, warns about this cognitive selection because for him, it actually creates a scenario where there's too big of a cognitive gap. See, further back in human history, when we didn't have a bunch of machines and we didn't have a bunch of mass production, we didn't have a lot of things to do our work for us. Intelligence was important, but it wasn't the only important skill. Your skill in combat, your brute strength. There are many things that could have been necessary to kind of survival of the community, to your personal survival, to your family survival. These kind of things that weren't IQ, right? But now that we have moved away from much of that, now that we've replaced much of that kind of labor, that muscle power, even that combat with machines and automation, these kind of things, mass production, really IQ becomes kind of the most important thing. And so now all of these people who are being selected for IQ are being pulled out of these areas to which they were born, where they could have bettered, and instead they're being concentrated here. And for Murray, that's a problem because that means that the people with the highest IQ, instead of say marrying someone in their hometown and kind of raising the general level, will instead move into these areas. They will only date and marry each other. And that means that you will continually get higher and higher IQ children from those mating groups, but but they will be more and more concentrated inside a particular class, inside particular geographic regions. And so for Murray, that's a huge problem because as the value of IQ intensifies, as your society becomes more and more dependent on high IQ jobs, where that becomes the only thing that is valued in many positions, the only thing that's rewarded, you are concentrating IQ in one class or one geographic area, and you're denying it to all the others. And so for Charles Murray, that was his big concern, and that's going to play into somewhat to what we're talking about here. Though Land will have a very different opinion on that and a different concern. Of course, this is also true of kind of the globalist perspective as well, right? A lot of people, you hear this all the time from conservatives that are still trying to do some kind of midpoint on immigration, and they'll say things like, "Well, we only want the best immigrants, right? We should have a selective system. We should we should have a point system. We should only take the best people to fill jobs that we can't fill otherwise." And there's a whole bunch of reasons that's wrong. I need to do a series on immigration in general. I'll probably do that here in the not so distant future. But one of the reasons that that's a problem is that it brain drains all these other countries, right? I remember distinctly my buddy was in the military and he was serving in Afghanistan, of course, during that war, and he's talking to his translator. And his translator is telling him about like all these nice families that used to live there and how there were used to be people who are doctors and stuff. And he says, What happened to him? Why don't you have that anymore? Why is it all kind of this backwater stuff?" And the guy says, "Well, because anybody of quality left decades ago, right? Like if you could get out, you did get out." And so all the people that could have bettered Afghanistan, that could have had a possibility of being competent leaders and providing, community support and increasing the quality of life, they're all gone, right? They all fled to Western nations. And so not only are you taking kind of the best and the brightest from your region in regions inside your nation, and you're centralizing them inside these cities. But if you globalize, if you have this kind of open borders initiative, or if you have even if you have a very selective process that only brings in people of a certain productivity, intelligence level, wealth, whatever. Even if you have that, you are sucking those people away from the places they live. You're denying the places they live the highest quality people who would be most likely to provide competent leadership, bring their communities to better places, raise the intelligence level, build infrastructure, found companies. All of these things, they're all gone because they all uh, ran away to these better places where they concentrate all these IQ capable, high IQ capable people, right? And so this is a problem that happens all the time. To be really clear, and this is going to be one of the tensions in this essay once we get into it, is that the question is this a one time problem we're facing right now? Is this a problem specifically of modernity? Or is this a problem of kind of wider cultures? Is this a cycle of history that civilizations go through as they kind of mature? I think if you're familiar with me, I'm a little bit of a cyclical history guy, and I think that these are cycles that we go through. I think we can see this cycle of history pulling people out off of their land into these cities, kind of chewing them up, spitting them out, and causing a very particular phenomenon. In fact, Oswald Spengler in Decline of the West goes into this in great detail, explaining kind of why the metropolis, the giant metropolis, we think of that as like the height of the civilization when it builds this, the great Roman city, or New York, or something like that, Hong Kong, and that's like the height of the civilization. But for Spengler, that's actually like the downslide of the civilization. That's going to lead to the death of the civilization because you're taking all of your people of competence, you're pulling them off of the land, you're concentrating them into the cities, you're separating them from kind of the metaphysical animating spirit of your civilization, and you're kind of turning them into this cold and bloodless kind of machine that then operates society. I'll go ahead and kind of give you a little bit of spoiler alert that's kind of where I think we are. But let's go ahead and jump into what Land thinks here. I've talked a lot about what I think, and kind of prequel here. But let's Land speak about this a little bit, and then we'll break down what he has to say. Remember, he's in a dialogue with people here. He's in a dialogue with Spandrel. He's in a dialogue with some of the other neo-reactionary thinkers of the day. So when we get into this, remember that this is a dialogue that's happening here. This is just something that he kind of wrote spontaneously. Uh, there are all kinds of anti tech com arguments that impress people who don't like techno commercialism. Anything appealing to a feudal sensibility with low tolerance for chaos and instability and a reverence for traditional hierarchies and modes of life will do. All right, so what does that mean? That's a little bit of inside baseball. So let me explain what he's talking about here. So in this time, and still today, for those who are reactionaries, aren't just conservative but kind of reject many tenets of what people call progress, there's a little bit of a disagreement, right? There's a couple different factions. People will just say neo-reactionaries or reactionaries as if it's all one thing, but it's not. They kind of all have a general disagreement with kind of the current system, but they don't all have the same goals, the same values, those kind of things. One of the factions is the techno-commercialists. This is the Landian faction. This is Nick Land's faction. And for them, the technology is good. The future is something to be embraced. It's the only way out of the problem. And so they're chasing down technological solutions. So they're embracing things. This is why Land is called an accelerationist in this sense, because he thinks that we just need to go faster to reach an escape velocity and get away from the problems of kind of maybe what might be seen as human cyclical history. Uh, there are others who are more of a I want to return to a simpler time, right? I want to return to natural hierarchies. I kind of want a neo feudalism. I want to get rid of many of the things that I see as a problem with kind of the modern world and return to different forms of social organization that were more popular in the past. And what he's saying here is that that there are a lot of arguments for kind of against the techno commercial side by kind of the more traditional side. They'll have a lot of problems with what's going on. And he dismisses some of them because they just don't share the same goals. But as he's going to say here, he's going to say this one, the IQ shredder problem, is a real one. And if you're a techno commercialist, if you're somebody who embraces this kind of technological acceleration and thinking that the technology in the future will solve this problem, then you need to take this one seriously, because while some of the other arguments against your position might just be because they share different values, this one really attacks kind of the heart of the techno commercialist option. And so he's going to say that this is something we need to pay attention to. There's one argument, and here's where he's going to say it. I kind of skipped ahead a little bit, but here he says it. There's one argument, however, that stands apart from the rest due to its complete independence from controversial moral or aesthetic preferences, or in other words, due to its eminence. It does not seek to persuade the proponents of hyper capitalist social arrangement to value other things, but only points out coldly and actually that such arguments are demonstrably self subverting at the biological level. All right. So what's he saying here? He's saying, again, there might be some disagreements from people who prefer tradition and those who prefer this kind of technological acceleration option, but this one cannot be discarded. This one is not just, well, we value, this part of humanity or spirituality, religion, this kind of thing, and you value advancement, technology. So we just have different values, and those things can't be resolved. He's saying that's not the case when it comes to the IQ shredder. This is a very real problem that strikes at the very heart of techno commercial ideas. That for anybody who's not invested in all this lingo, an easy way to just think about it is can technology actually solve this problem, right? Like is this a problem of eternal problem of human organization tied to the human condition, or can technology actually outrun this societal fault? And that's what he's going to be investigating here today. Is the IQ shredder an inevitability that will impact everyone's society, or is this something that technology can outrun? It does not seek to persuade. All right, did that part. Sorry. Uh, The most devastating formulation of the argument, and one that was given its convenient name, was presented by Spandrel in March 2013. So this is actually pretty old. And a post on Singapore, a city state he described as an IQ shredder. All right, so now we're going to get to the important part. Remember, he's in a dialogue with people like Spandrel here, right? All right. So how does an IQ shredder work? The basic machinery is not difficult to describe once its profound social historical irony is appreciated. The model IQ shredder is a high performance capitalistic polity with a strong neo reactionary bias. So again, he's already kind of pointed out what does that mean? Something like Singapore, right? For those who don't know, Singapore is a very advanced. It's a city state basically. It's very selective in who gets in. The it does allow immigration, but is highly selective, right? And it's very serious. They execute people for drug use, right? Like this is a very strict place. You have to want to be there. You have to fight to be there. You have to prove yourself worthy to be there. And once you're there, you don't have a lot of rights, the way that we think about them in the West, but still people want to be there because it's very safe. It's very productive. You can make a lot of money. You can have a lot of very modern amenities. It's very clean. It's a very nice place to live as long as you understand that there are very serious restrictions on kind of how you can live there, which is probably why it's a nice place to live. But that's how it is. So he's going to run through kind of these ideas of what an IQ shredder is. So one, it's a level of civilization and social order is such that it is attractive to talented and competent people. So that's really important, right? First, if you're going to create a civilization like this, it needs to be attractive to talented and competent people, right? You have to be attracting a certain type of person to concentrate IQ in a place like this. Now, if you have been paying attention to the series, you might have come across the one where me and Prudentialist talk about patchwork, which is Curtis Yarvin's system of basically a million little Singapores. Nick Land was a big fan of this, right? That's one of the reasons he latched onto this because he felt like that was a very good solution to the many of the problems he was facing. And so in that argument, you kind of have these little patches, and each one governs itself, and people can leave anytime they want, but getting in is more difficult. So the only the highest quality people will kind of be drawn to certain patches, certain little Singapores, and that's what he's saying. He's like the first step in creating this IQ shredder is it needs to have it needs to be really clean, it needs to be really safe, it needs to be really advanced, it needs to select for the kind of things that will draw people in. It needs to have the right incentives that will bring in people who are competent and talented, high IQ people, right? That's what they're looking for. Number two, its immigration policy is unapologetically selective, i.e., first order eugenic. Okay, very scary word there. What's he saying? They're selecting for high IQ people. Um, this is what universities do, by the way, or did at least for a long time, right? They're selecting for people who can prove a high degree of competence, intelligence, productivity. They are being eugenic in the sense that they are selecting it particularly. I see people saying, "How is IQ getting shredded?" Don't worry, we're going to get there. But first, we have to explain how it gets concentrated. Third, it sustains an economic structure that is remarkably effective at extracting productive activity from all available adults. So it needs to be built in a way that is very good at extracting that productivity, right? They need the efficiency, they needed the productivity, right? They need to pull that out of there. So it needs to have an economic system that is very particularly good at doing this. It's going to be highly capitalistic. It's going to have this kind of evolutionary aspect to it where it's burning away what doesn't work and it's selecting for what works, and it extracts it at kind of the highest level of efficiency possible. And four, it is effectively specialized within a wider commercial network to which it provides valuable goods and services and from which it draws economic and demographic resources. So this is a really important one. This last one is very important. I think the other three are pretty easy to understand, but this one is really important. IQ shredders can't exist on their own. Okay, IQ shredders are basically parasitic in a way. And we'll see why in a moment. They can't they can produce a lot of things, but they got to be able to sell it to someone. You need markets elsewhere. It needs to be part of an economic commercial network where it can distribute the things that it's extracting. And it needs to be able to extract demographic resources. What does that mean? Okay. So here's where we get to how the IQ gets shredded. Okay, this is ultimately the problem, right? At first, you're like, okay, well, people might agree or disagree with concentrating all these intelligent people, but in general, it seems like it's going to be fine, right? That's going to be good, right? They're going it's going to be a nice society if nothing else, even if you disagree with kind of how it gets there, and maybe that's not what you want for your society, it'll be good, right? Here's the problem, guys. We There's a serious issue with people in metropolitan areas having children. People, high IQ people, who are very driven by their jobs, who are obsessed with production and focusing on their jobs, they tend not to have kids. They tend not to reproduce. So you take all this IQ, you concentrate it. That's great, right? Okay, they're doing all kinds of cool things. They're building, all kinds of amazing technologies. They're working in financial sectors. That's unfortunately what a lot of the IQ ends up doing instead of actually doing what are actually productive things. They just kind of it's just building financial derivatives on top of themselves over and over again. But the problem is these people don't have kids. And when they don't have kids, that IQ gets burned, right? You're concentrating all this IQ, you're bringing it all together in one place. It's all serving a particular capitalistic model. It's creating, all these financial things, but it's not really producing a lot of products. And these people aren't having kids, and so their IQ is not getting passed on into the next generation. So you're taking all of your IQ, you're skimming all of your IQ from either inside the nation, or if you're in a global model across the entire world, and you're skimming all this IQ, you're taking the cream off the top of everything, and you're dumping it into these highly productive cities that are super nice places to live. Right? They're very clean. They're very productive. Lots of money to be made. Amazing, art, entertainment, food, whatever. But people don't have kids. And then it stops producing more people with high IQs. And so you actually end up shredding that IQ, right? That's the problem it runs into. So we'll get more into that in a second, but let's go ahead and jump back in here with what Land is saying. In sum, it skims the human genetic stock regionally and even globally, in large part due to the exceptional opportunity it provides and for the conversion of bio-privileged human capital into economic value. So, more or less a restatement of what I was saying there, right? That it skims through the entire region or even the globe. It pulls people in because it's got all these amenities. It's much cleaner. It's much safer. It's got the best educations. It's got the best schools. It's got the best neighborhoods. It's got the best food. It's got the best culture. But and it rewards all these people in a way no other place can do this, right? There's a reason people who are smart move to cities, right? It's not just because the university's there, though that is part of it. But it's because these large cities can offer rewards that a local city can't. If you're a high IQ person and you're living in the middle of nowhere, in some kind of rural area, then the best you can do is like be the mayor of the rural area, which is better than not being that. But if you're a really high IQ person, you might be able to, run a Fortune 500 company, or lead a nation, or run a military, or be an advanced researcher at a high powered, or be a high powered attorney in some law firm somewhere. Like, there's a lot of things where you could make a bunch of money and have a lot of amenities and live the life of a true elite, a lush elite, right? You can do all of these things if you move to a city, but you can't do that if you stay in your region. So this has always been something that humans do. They move for opportunity, especially if they're if they're gifted kind of beyond their station, beyond, the kind of the current area they can live in. But the problem is that we're going to get this on a much more massive scale, right? It's not just going to be you moving from kind of your village to the big town that's 100 miles away. We're talking about like going across the world to Singapore, right? So this is a much higher kind of concentration and a much wider net that it's throwing to cast and skim kind of all the best and brightest and push them into the IQ shredder. Um, let's see. From a strictly capitalistic perspective, genetic quality is comparatively wasted anywhere else. Consequently, spontaneous currents and economic incentives suck in talent to optimize its exploitation. So basically, saying if you're only looking at it from like the viewpoint of capitalism, if you're only looking at it of from the viewpoint of kind of this production, then there's then kind of human capital is wasted anywhere else. If you're a brilliant person, then yeah, it's great that you might be sitting in the middle of, I don't know, Iowa and making sure that like your town has better, water and has a better fire department. Like it's nice that you're leading them over there, but if you could have been curing cancer somewhere, if you could have been making trillions of dollars, if you could have been doing something that would have been vastly increased income and productivity and everything, then in the purely capitalist perspective, you're wasted where you are. Now, if you're not purely interested in just efficiency, if you're not just an efficiency brain, if you're not just a hyper rationalist, then you might care more about your city, your town, your family, your community, your people, than you care about the abstract, efficiency of Singapore. So you don't care. You stay in your hometown, right? But he's saying from a purely capitalistic perspective, that's the only thing you're thinking about, then your efforts are kind of wasted there because you're not factoring in like, well, these are my people, this is my tradition, this is my homeland, and you're only thinking about the purely mercenary capitalistic efficiency of the whole thing, then you're wasted there and you would be more efficient and more useful being concentrated in a city somewhere. Now he's going to acknowledge this solution is not for everybody, right? If you think this sounds simply horrific, this argument is not for you. If you don't need it. If, on the other hand, it conjures up a vision of terrestrial paradise, as it does for the magnetized migrants it draws in, then you need to follow it very carefully. So, what's he saying there? He's saying, look, I get this argument is not going to be for everybody. If you're a traditional person, if you're somebody who is tied to your religion, if you're tied to your homeland, you're tied to your family, your tradition, if you value those things more, then this argument is not going to make any sense to you. You're not going to care, right? It doesn't matter. So don't worry about this. He's focused on people with his particular goal, which is kind of this focus on accelerating kind of technological achievement and kind of escaping what he sees as a problem of kind of human existence, right? So he says, look, a lot of people who get drawn to these things, who want to move to like a Singapore, they don't care about that stuff. They're willing to leave their homelands, leave their families, their languages, their cultures, whatever, and they're willing to move here because it's kind of a paradise, right? Again, you might not like the way Singapore handles certain things, but it's a much nicer place than most other areas of the world because it specifically does not allow certain people. It specifically does not allow certain behaviors. Again, it's executing drug users, those kind of things. It doesn't mess around, right? And so because of that, it produces a very particular outcome. That might not be for everybody. That might not be desirable for most people. But if it is desirable, then you need to think for certain people, then you need to think about this problem, right? Because while you might have that paradise now in Singapore, because it has extracted all of these high IQ people, it is also shredding their IQ, right? It's getting rid of it. It's slowly breaking this down and disposing of it. And so there's a shelf life on this, right? You're burning resources to generate a particular lifestyle, but the lifestyle you're generating, it cannot self-sustain. And so the thing he's pointing out is like this is a very serious argument that people who embrace this technological accelerationism need to take seriously. It's a real problem that will continue to present itself in the current model that they have. And so if you ignore it, you'll just run out of resources to burn IQ wise, demographically, right? And you'll end up with an unsustainable future. The most advanced models of neo-reactionary social order on Earth work like this. Hong Kong and Singapore, like I said, his examples here, combining resilient ethnic traditions with super dynamic techno-economic performance to produce an open yet self-protective, civilized, socially tranquil, and high-growth enclave of outgoing, broad-spectrum functionality. So he's saying you've got these kind of these models that he's looking at. You've got the Hong Kongs and the Singapores, and they have a very specific tradition, right? They're trying to promote a very specific culture. They're very protective of it, but they are open to things like immigration. It's not just an ethno state, right? Like they are skimming again. They have to skim like these IQ people from many different cultures, many different backgrounds all over the world. And so he's saying that that is a way that they have this set up so it can continue to kind of produce the outcomes that they're looking for. The outcome, as Spandrel explains, is genetic incineration. All right, so now we're getting to the IQ shredding part. This little quote here is a quote from the Spandrel piece. I'll go ahead and read it, but for context, basically he did like a kind of a fake dialogue with the leader of the kind of the head of Singapore, or was the head of being Lee Kuan Yew. But let's go ahead and jump in here real quick. He says China will make progress, but if you look at the per capita they've got, differences are wide. We have the advantage of quality control of people who come in. So we have bright Indians, bright Chinese, bright Caucasians. So the increase in population means an increase in talent. So what's he saying there? Well, for context, what the kind of fake interview with Spandrel there is trying to say, that Eclipse there is that Singapore has a very selective system, right? They're only picking the best, they're only picking the brightest, they're skimming the top off of everybody. And so they're relying on the fact that as they increase their population through immigration, it's only from the brightest, right? It's only the brightest from India, from Western countries, from China. They're bringing in only the most talented people, right? But here comes the big question, right? Can you do this forever? And that's kind of what he says next. How many bright Indians and bright Chinese are there, Harry? Surely they're not infinite. And what will they do in Singapore? Well, engage in finance, marketing, a rat race, and depress their fertility rate down to 0.78, wasting valuable genes just so your property prices don't go down. Singapore is an IQ shredder. All right, so that's the big thing he's getting to here, right? Is that basically Singapore, because it's because of the nature of metropolitan life, to kind of cosmopolitan life, people tend to have fewer children. Now, there are many reasons for this, right? First, childcare becomes extremely expensive. The cost of educating children, like when you get in these larger cities, the normal schools are garbage, so you have to pay more to put people into these schools, children into these schools. There's all the cost of housing. Extra space for children becomes very difficult. Right on top of this, there's also the problem, of course, of uh, just time, right? When both adults in kind of a relationship are completely dedicated to their careers, the way that you probably have to be to get into a place like Singapore, then you are selecting individuals who are not going to have time to have children, right? They're not going to be able to care for their own children. They're not going to be able to raise their own children. They're not going to be able to devote the time. It's going to look less and less attractive. And this is something that Oswald Spengler talked about. I did a video on this if you want to get his thoughts very specifically. But Oswald Spengler talked about how once you get to a certain stage in civilizations, uh, people just stop having kids because it becomes less and less attractive. Kind of the amusements, the distractions, the cultural and life goals of people become too interesting, too different, and too demanding, and they kind of drive out the desire to have children, right? And so all of these things kind of take away from the fact that people are going to have children. Also, obviously, you have people who are more likely to regularly use things like birth control and reliably use it, right? So they're going to engage in more careful behavior. They're not going to have as many accidental children, those kind of things. And so all of these things kind of come together, and they kind of make it less likely that people will have kids. And so you're selecting for high IQ, but you're also ironically selecting for people who are less likely to have more children and pass on that IQ. And that brings us to a really interesting question. Is IQ the great filter? Like, do civilizations eventually get too smart and too developed to reproduce themselves, right? Is the reproduction itself a function of a society that is less less developed? Uh, this is something again that Oswald Spengler talks a lot about. That basically, once a society has to ask, will they have children? The game is already over, right? Like once having children is not like a natural rhythm of life. It's not something that naturally happens inside a society, then they kind of start to see the decline. And again, this is something that's very cyclical, right? You can see this over and over again. Of course, places like Japan and Korea are famously cratering their birth rates. Like South Korea is not even going to exist at this point because the culture there is all about getting into these schools, studying all day. Everyone spends all their time at work or at school. They don't or in these kind of amusements and distractions. They don't have kids. They don't form families, right? And so, is there such thing as a society that is too high IQ? Is there part of the human condition that once people get too smart, they become too involved in kind of the Byzantine ins and outs of their culture, all the different things they can pursue as a side project that aren't families? Do they eventually just break themselves apart? I think the answer to this question is actually yes. I'm kind of on team cyclical history here. I think this is a natural part of how civilizations are born and die. I think Spengler's right about this. Every civilization kind of has its life cycle. It kind of grows up, it expands, it kind of solidifies itself, makes its greatest impacts, and then kind of slowly withers away over time as kind of the things that it built start consuming more and more of its kind of human capital, and the people lose the ability to kind of continue their society. So I'm not going to continue with the let's see. I'll read one more paragraph here because the rest is just in talking between kind of different people of that time. But let me read one more paragraph. The most hardcore capitalist response to this is to double down on the anti-human accelerationism. This genetic burn rate is obviously unsustainable, so we need to convert the human species into an auto-intelligent, roboticized capital as fast as possible before the whole process goes down in flames. I don't expect the suggestion to be well received in reactionary circles. So for people who just like ran screaming for the exit here, what he's saying is very honestly very radical, right? But this is where Nick Land goes. His solution, I think he's identifying a very real problem. I think he's identifying a really uh, very real feature of the human condition and the cycle of history. So Nick Land doesn't want the kind of the civilizational collapse that's going to come, right? He foresees this. He sees the problem. He sees that what's happening now in these IQ shredders is unsustainable, and he doesn't want what comes next. He wants this paradise to continue. He wants the kind of this tradition to continue. He wants it to be carried on to something else. And so his solution is distinctly not human. Believe it or not, he is down for kind of this Terminator future, and he says basically we can't escape this cycle. It's built into kind of the core of humanity that we will go through this over and over again. That this IQ shredder phenomenon will produce itself, that we will keep getting this concentration of intelligence in cities, and then they will kind of slowly but surely burn out kind of our civilization because they'll concentrate all of the highest IQ people from other parts of the region and bring them in, and then kind of burn their intelligence on things that don't matter, like financial manipulation and having the nicest restaurant and that kind of thing. And he says humans are just not going to solve this problem. He does. A lot of people are like, well, you can incentivize smart people to have kids. You can do that. There's a lot of some of these Norwegian countries are trying to do this now. Scandinavian countries are trying to do this now, where they're uh, trying to pay people to have kids, subsidize people to have kids. Nick Land doesn't even go for that, right? He doesn't even like, oh well, we should try to figure out all these ways to do that. He just goes straight to, this is not going to get solved, and so the best way to do this is to double down and accelerate, right? This is why he's an accelerationist, because he says, all right, so we double down on this anti-human accelerationism. Genetic burn rate is obviously unsustainable. So what do we need to do? We convert humans into roboticized capital. We need basically we need to get people into thinking machines here real quick. We need to turn the things that are human into things that are non-human, so that so this kind of genetic burn rate of IQ shredders can be escaped. Right? We can achieve escape velocity, and kind of transfer our consciousness, transfer our intelligence into things that will not be subject to this process because it seems like we can't get out of it. And like he says at the end, even in his kind of more out there reactionary circles, he doesn't think this is going to be popular, right? Because this is a very controversial thing to say that the thing to do is to just go ahead and put the pedal to the floor, accelerate this process, and go through this. Personally, I am not a fan of that solution. I'm on team human here, right? So I would not agree with land. I would be one of these reactionaries that for whom this suggestion does not work. However, I still think it's very important to think about this problem because it is a very real process. And if we are not on this Landian solution, right? If we are not somebody who wants to accelerate this process and find some kind of technological robotic solution to this problem, then we have to think about it. And thinking about it means understanding that this might be a function of our civilization that we have to go through. This might be a period in time of our civilization that we have to go through before we make it to the other side. Cultures don't just completely burn out and die. They something new is born, right? Something new is born, and so it could be that this is a moment in time that kind of modern humans are going through that they have to reach the other side of and then start again. But that could mean that there are very difficult problems, and one of the problems could be the fact that we are shredding IQ in these cities. We are concentrating IQ in these cities. What can be done about that? Well, that's a much harder problem, right? Something that I won't be able to get in to today. But I do like this essay. I think it's really important. It brings up something that's very difficult problem, something that really no one is thinking about, that we don't have a lot of people working on. It's a consequence of our lifestyle and of our kind of current obsession with production that we don't really grapple with. We just kind of say, oh, we'll figure it out, and then we kind of just barrel through it. And it might be that no civilization does have the discipline to address this issue, or maybe we could. Maybe we could be the first civilization that's able to do that by making certain sacrifices and think about it a certain way. But we can't do that until we're at least looking at the problem. We see land solution. Land solution is something I think a lot of people wouldn't like. So if you don't like land solution, it's time to start thinking about another one. Because if you don't, the problem he's talking about is very real, and you will keep running into it over and over again. All right, guys. We had a few questions over here, so let me switch over to the super chats very quick. Let's see. The elite here for $10. Thank you very much. Would like to hear you talk about America being founded by Englishmen to be an English nation. See, many people think that there's a generic European as though that's all the same. Maybe with Sargon. Yeah, that would be interesting. I think Sargon, or perhaps Scott Manion, I think is also someone who talks about this to some extent. So yeah, it could be interesting. Though I think I think that while obviously the country's originally founded mainly on the Anglo kind of paradigm, America has very much become its own thing, much to the stress of some people in England. But it is its own character, and so while it may be interesting to talk about those roots and maybe that distinct from a wider European project, I think that it's hard to pretend that America did not kind of turn into its own thing later on. So, but that might be worth addressing. Thanks for that suggestion there. Florida Henry here for $5. Considering city people have a low birth rate, seems like an intelligence death spiral. Yeah, Florida Henry, I think you sent that earlier, but you kind of figured out exactly where we were going, right? That there is a very real problem that IQ actually seems to be something that selects out for kind of reproduction. And so if you are concentrating people into these cities, and people are much less likely to have children once they're in them, then you do end up in this IQ shredder, this intelligence death spiral, and that is really the core of the problem that he's talking about there. But some again, the real issue, the reason that this one it's different this time, that's again cyclical, recurring. It's an issue that happens over and over to civilizations, but this time it's happening on a global scale, right? Previously, when this happened, it might have happened in the Mediterranean, Italy, Rome. It might have happened across some other kind of dying empire. But in this case, because we have a more global view, because it's very easy to recruit and draw from all these areas, and there's these elite networks that let you do it at a moment's notice, and we have far more complicated commercial networks that let them distribute these things and draw demographic resources from these areas, like Land talked about. It's now a much wider scale, right? So this is no longer a problem that just fits inside one particular region or one particular empire, but something that could expand to the whole globe, right? Because you're literally pulling intelligence from all of these areas, from all of the nations of the world, not just from, say, the small rural village next to your large town or even your regional empire, but the entire globe. So it does change the nature of the problem to some extent, or the scale of the problem, I should say. The nature of the problem stays the same. To Telos for $5. If the end of IQ optimization is AI, maybe shredding it isn't so bad. For Trez, reminds me of whose idea that high IQ people buy into the techno society. Again, yeah, it depends on how comfortable you are with the AI solution. If you think AI is an acceptable replacement for humanity, then yeah, you might say, okay, it's not a huge deal. Or if you're saying, well, we just let the AI take care of us, well, okay, but then we end up in like this like Wally scenario, right? Where the genetic stock is all kind of really low IQ, high time preference, people who make terrible decisions for themselves, but they have a AI that basically kind of shepherds them around and takes care of them, so it's okay at the end of the day, right? Or what's the H.G. Wells time machine? I'm trying to remember the two groups. I think one of them was like the Elam, right? But these beautiful people who walk around and they just find fruit everywhere and they're eating and everything's taken care of for them, and you find out it's because kind of these evil uh, uh terrible looking guys in the underworld are kind of consuming them, right? Eloy and the Murlocs. Thank you, guys. Yeah. So you could end up in that scenario where yes, you're in this kind of beautiful paradise to some extent because AI is taking care of you, but you're actually just being farmed Matrix style as a battery or as cannibalistic food. So there's all kinds of terrible possible sci-fi outlooks there. Let's see. Bend over for $20. Thank you very much, sir. Or MacIntyre for American Caesar. Yeah, I don't see that one happening. But I do appreciate your support. It's a glowing endorsement. I certainly appreciate. Good to know I have exactly at least one supporter. If I decide to take the purple, if I choose not to refuse the crown 3 times, then I know I've got at least one guy backing there. Let's see. I think we got one more now. Ronald McNuggets here for $10. You should read Volkmar Weiss's The Population Cycle That Drives Human History. Talks about political angle more high IQ minorities targeted for violence due to success and revenge. Very interesting. Okay, yeah, no, that does sound like an interesting book. I will take a look at that here. All right, I'll make sure to remember that. But thank you for that suggestion because that is certainly something that I would be interested in digging into more. All right, guys. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you so much for coming by again. This will be part of the wider series on Nick Land. So I've got a playlist of all the different kind of essays and kind of thoughts that I've had looking over many of Nick Land's works. So if you want to watch that, you can always go back to the playlist on YouTube and kind of get a wider idea of what's going on. This is just one of many things in a broader conversation about Nick Land, neo-reactionary thought, philosophy, that kind of thing. All right, so thank you for coming by. If it's your first time, make sure that you go ahead and subscribe to the channel, of course. And then if you would like to get these broadcasts as podcasts, you just want to get the audio because you're mowing the lawn or working out or whatever, and you don't want to see me scroll through text, then you can go ahead and subscribe to the Roy McIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. It's on iTunes, it's on Spotify, it's on Google Play, it's on all that stuff and more, guys. So make sure to go ahead and check it out. And when you do, leave a rating and a review. That really helps, drives the algorithm and everything. Of course, you can also, don't forget, you can watch these things on Rumble, Odyssey, and Blaze TV. If you want to support that way, that's always a great help. Lots of good content over there as well. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and wrap that up. But thank you for coming by. And as always, I will talk to you next time.